Hello and welcome to another episode of the Curious Mind podcast. My name is Gabriel Ellis. I'm a psychotherapist, Buddhist scholar, and a researcher in consciousness. And today I want to expand on a topic that I hear people talking about quite often in self-development and also in spirituality, which is a kind of a dogma not to judge and to perceive things as they are. So, in personal development, in spiritual circles, and even in psychotherapy and couples therapy, people often speak of this not judging and instead to accept things as they are or to perceive things without making judgments. This approach is meant to promote healthy development, to avoid mental rigidity, to avoid harmful emotions and egocentric triggers. And so it makes quite a lot of sense to try to pursue this goal. When you begin personal and therapeutic growth, such as vice, to refrain from judgment can really be helpful. And for many people, it is difficult when they start to observe their own thoughts to withdraw from, to abstain from judging themselves harshly, for example. So, in that sense, it is very valid. However, if you try to strictly adhere to it in detail in the everyday life and in moment to moment mind observation, you will notice that it does not work. Time and again, we find ourselves evaluating, criticizing, or judging ourselves, other people, or society, or the world as a whole. The reason for this is not merely a lack of effort, which often enough is also the case. It lies in the nature of the mind itself. And in this video, I describe a deeper understanding of this problem so that hopefully you won't set yourself unrealistic expectations for yourself or see yourself or others as spiritual or psychological failures. My main point in short is that the mind must judge. It can do no other. The challenge lies in explaining how psychological and spiritual growth can still occur despite this. To explore why the mind must judge, I will draw primarily on Hegel and Buddhist theory. Starting with Hegel, to put his program, his understanding simply, for Hegel, the spirit, this is his main entity, the spirit encompasses everything. It encompasses matter, consciousness, society, and the divine. And it is in the nature of the spirit to strive to understand itself, or in other words, to achieve complete unity with itself. To this end, the spirit undergoes a process of development in many stages. And in this development, the human consciousness represents only one intermediate stage. So when you come across theories of Hegel and you see the term or concept of the spirit, don't misunderstand it as something like mind or consciousness. For Hegel, spirit is the unifying entity in existence in general. So in the process of becoming self-aware, the spirit starts at the level of nature, in matter, where it is the furthest from itself. And this is evident in the external separatedness of time and space. These time and space are expressions of the separation of the spirit from itself. In time, events arise and fade without leaving a trace, like quantum fluctuations, everything is bubbling, appears and disappears, and it deprives this time separatedness, deprives the spirit of the opportunity to grasp its own essence, because the phenomena just disappear so quickly. In spatial separation, objects do coexist, but they are not related to each other. So this separatedness that is the main feature of physical material nature is an expression of how the spirit is still very far from understanding, from being unified with itself, just because all of these phenomena are so separated in time and space. The spirit begins to relate itself more closely at the levels of life. Living beings relate to themselves by maintaining their physical structures and remembering past events. And at the same time, their bodies of the individual living beings use reproduction to relate to the species. And so this relation of bodies to themselves, sustaining themselves, and the relation of bodies to other bodies of the same species are the first important signs of the spirit starting to relate to itself, to develop memory in genes, in minds, and so forth, so that it develops the capability to relate, to understand, to grasp itself. Okay, but even at this primitive level, organisms, so lower life beings, mammals, and so on, organisms make clear value judgments. Living organisms, they use energy to sustain themselves, which inherently involves judgments that prioritize survival and avoid physical disintegration. They avoid pain and suffering. At the species level, there are also judgments. These judgments favor community and high social status while avoiding loneliness and low social standing. And this is the more apparent the higher you go in the development of mammals. So these judgments naturally express the level of the spirit at that particular point. At any point of every stage of the development of the spirit, there are occurring judgments and values, evaluations that are adequate to that particular stage. And on that level or stage of simple living beings, judgments and evaluations are instinctive and driven by impulses. At higher levels, where the spirit draws closer to itself, and humans are an example of this, judgments can become more subtle. But one principle, again, remains. Judgments and evaluations are natural expressions of the stage of the spirit's development. Wherever the spirit is, it will make judgments and evaluations according to that particular stage or level. Coming to Buddhism, the connection between judgment and the level of the mind is even more subtle. The key concept here in Theravada and old historical original Buddhism, the concept is Ayatana, the translation of which is the home base or the habitat of the mind. Unfortunately, even though this concept is very widely used in the Buddhist texts, the concept is often misunderstood or taken too simply. And so I've written a short article about it, which I published and which you will find linked in the descriptions below. The mind's usual habitat of normal human life is the sensory world, and this is how it's been described in the Buddhist texts. And this includes seeing, hearing, all of those senses, including thoughts and concepts. And because the sensory world is the mind's default home, certain priorities naturally arise, such as the health of the body, the acquisition of power, possessions, and influence, and on the other side, also the fear of losing all of these things. We as human beings are thrown into a life of identification with the body. This is not something that we have chosen. We are come into this life, we're born into this life. Also, the identification with emotions and social status. And we automatically develop value judgments based on what is perceived as good or healthy in this normal human life. And from these judgments arise our intentions and our actions. So we are judgmental as human beings as we are born into this normal human life. This mental habitat of the sensory world naturally gives rise to the human ego and what Nietzsche calls the human all too human, the non-idealized, the sober understanding of what drives human life. In Buddhist texts, judgments on this level are said to be based on greed and aversion. And this description may seem overly polemical, but it only emphasizes that people should seek a higher habitat to achieve true balance and true peace. Practically speaking, this means that while also for normal people, a subtle, healthy relationship with oneself and others is possible without being too unhealthily judgmental, it requires continuous efforts, self-control, introspection, and a supportive social environment. Which means when stress increases or the favorable conditions disappear, such as income, or when we are left alone, when our partner leaves us, when our health fails us. So when these harsh conditions appear in normal life, the self-control eventually falters, and the longing for sensory comfort inevitably gives rise to worry, fear, and psychological suffering. And this brings with it all those harsh judgments, all those harsh evaluations that are psychologically and socially unhealthy. So we are born into this world. When we are able to create favorable conditions, then we can have a practice that is based on self-control and those favorable conditions, where it seems that we are not overly judgmental. But this is a rather shaky ground, and when the conditions fall away, the favorable conditions, then we fall back to the default of the mental habitat of being in the sensual world, and we start again to be harshly, unhealthily judgmental towards ourselves and others. And because of this danger, the Buddhist mental development emphasizes the need for the mind for a higher mental home. Now, interestingly, ethical behavior is seen as necessary, but eventually insufficient as a home for the mind. The next secure home base is reached only when one becomes stable in meditation and can reliably enter and remain the state known as jhana. At this level, individuals are no longer attached to the sensory pleasures and the sensory well-being, the physical well-being, but instead focus on mental purity. So the whole logic changes, the intentions and the evaluations of the mind change because it has reached and secured a new mental home, the mental home of deep meditation. And in this mental home, what is important is not power and security and all of these criteria of the normal sensual world, but mental purity. As it should be clear by now, even in these stable meditative states, judgments, evaluations, and intentions do persist, but they are, to repeat, no longer tied to the body, not to the ego, and not to the social world. Instead, they revolve around mental clarity, compassion, and spiritual expansiveness. And this is something that people reliably experience when they are in those higher meditative states. The mind becomes very vast and expansive. Judgments are there, but they become subtler and are guided by understanding the truth about the mind, the truth of the mind. And this truth, another term for this in Buddhist terms is the Dharma, is stable by definition. It does not fluctuate with the external circumstances, with socio-political circumstances. It remains the same. And because of the stability, this is why people who are grounded in truth, they appear calm and steady. Nonetheless, they make value judgments. In Buddhism, this judgment ceases only, judging at all, ceases only when the mind has no home at all, at any level of consciousness. And this state is achieved only with a complete dissolution of nibbana or nirvana. So as long as the mind exists, as long as consciousness exists, also from a Buddhist perspective, there must be judgments and value statements, even if they're very subtle on higher stages. So again, from this perspective, there is no end of judgments. Judgment is always there. Judging is always there. Now, Hegel did not anticipate the mental development that occurs in meditation. Also, during his time, his sources of ancient Indian literature were very bad. Many texts have not been discovered yet, or at least they have not reached him at that point. But nonetheless, it fits very well into his system. Deep meditation provides profound insight into the essence of humanity and the essence of the spirit, both within oneself and through empathy with others. If I, in deep meditation, understand my mind, in quotes, I understood mind in general. And so I understand the mind and the spirit of other people as well. And in this understanding, the temporal and spatial separations that characterize the mind at the natural state are, in Hegel's terms, sublated or transcended, because time doesn't matter. If I understood mind, I understood the mind of past people. I understand the mind of people when they emerge in the future. I understood mind or spirit in general. Now, this development in Buddhism to reach a new secure home base is very limited. There are very few people who are so advanced in the development of meditation and the mind that they can actually declare a new home base in the higher states of meditation. Most of us who meditate, even when we meditate successfully, we make kind of short trips into this world, but we are not able to be so safe in this that this becomes really the new mental, stable, default place for our mind. So between the sensory world and the meditation, there is fortunately an intermediate stage accessible to many more people. And this is the level of virtues. In Western philosophy, these virtues were first articulated by Plato as arete, a better translation is excellence. And later, these very virtues were integrated into Christianity as the cardinal virtues. There are four of them: moderation, courage, justice, and wisdom. Christianity added three theological virtues to those classic four. One is the faith in God. Second is the hope for the eternal life after death, and selfless love. Now, people in virtues orient themselves towards truth that are as independent as possible from current circumstances. So again, when we ground ourselves in virtues, we are grounding oneself in some aspect of truth. And this truth, when we achieve the stability in that, is independent from external circumstances. What is courageous, what is moderate, what is intelligent, is relatively independent from everyday life experiences or how socio-political circumstances change. And so people rooted in virtues orient towards themselves, towards these truths. In this virtue orientation, judgments do still occur, but they focus less on superficialities like appearance, wealth, or power, and more on qualities such as bravery or justice or wisdom. However, without deep insight into the mind's purity as it is achieved in experience in meditation, even when we orient ourselves towards virtues, there's always a risk of slipping into the shadow side of worldly truths. And this shadow side is dogmatic extremism. And no matter which form it takes, this extremism can be religious extremism, can be conspiracy theories, or it can be a condescending Western materialism. In all of these cases, because it is superficially taken, because it is not founded on deep insight into the mind, people think that their truths are the real truths. And so they start to protect and defend and try to convince others of their truths. And when other people come with their truths, then they are dangerous and have to be disarmed. And so again, the whole, what the purpose was of basing oneself on the stability of virtues can slip into its shadow side and then become again a game of egos. So even though it has many healthy aspects, it is important to keep in mind that the orientation towards virtues has a shadow side, and I have described the shadow sides and some other details about the virtue and value orientation in my videos, which you can find linked below. Now, until the mind achieves unity with itself, according to Hegel, or ultimate dissolution of nirvana in Buddhism, we must continue to judge and strive. There's no way around it. We just have to try to not let our judgments become overly egocentric or harmful to ourselves or others. Now, existentialists like Nietzsche, Heidegger, and Sartre emphasize that if we are to orient ourselves by values and virtues, we must develop our own understanding of them, at least our own worldview, our own personality, and our understanding. And this seems to be a truth that has stood the test of time. Virtue orientation has been recommended since antiquity and the Middle Ages. But in order to make them really work for us, in order to get far away from the shadow sides of the extremism of dogmas and our own personal truths, we have to make them our own. And by making them our own, we understand that virtue orientation is something precious, is something that I cannot convince others of. What I can do is I can support others to find their own way in the labyrinths of virtues, of what courage means to them, of what moderation means to them, of what intelligence means to them. And so I become less dogmatic about it because I understand that in order for it to be truly meaningful, people have to develop them on their own. And this does align with Hegel's descriptions and experiences from meditation, where old challenges to mental clarity must repeatedly be approached anew so that those truths of the development of the spirit or the depth of meditation becomes fresh and new again and again. Now, keeping in mind those principles in my own psychotherapeutic work, I often re-examine seemingly psychological principles with my clients. I mean, our kind of the spirit of the time, the zeitgeist, is full of psychological ideas, full of ideas of what healthy life, a healthy mental life is. What red flags are, self-love, mindfulness, non-judgmental attitudes. All of these are permeating the common understanding of what healthy mental development is. But unless we really investigate it in detail, we fail to grasp the meaning of it to ourselves. And then it remains superficial. So this is what I do very often in my psychotherapeutic work. I go through these concepts that people understand have values, but they don't know how to apply it themselves. How do I say no at work? How do I maintain healthy boundaries? At the beginning, these are just slogans, and it has to be filled with life, not by an authority, a therapist, or a book, or a self-help guide. But this is something that people have to find and re-examine by themselves so that it makes sense for them. If you are interested in such a work, if you would like to pick up that work with me, you will find a link in the description below for a free discovery call. And maybe beyond that, you would like to continue to work with me, at least for a while, in order to get an understanding of these processes that you can then develop for yourself. I hope you liked this content. If you're interested, then stay tuned for the next episode. I try to post them every 2 weeks. And until then, I wish you all the best and see you next time.